Hello and welcome to the Ridgefield Playhouse Diversity Film Series. I'm your host, Cheryl Washington, of this bonus content, and I couldn't be happier to be able to interview someone who I absolutely adore because she hired me a number of years ago. We'll go into that in a second. But we're talking about a fantastic movie, an explosive movie, Bombshell. And you already know what it's about because you just took a look at it. But this really does take a glimpse into the downfall, if you will, of Roger Ailes, who was the former CEO and chairman of Fox News. So Bombshell, as you know, also starred Charlize Theron as Megyn Kelly, Nicole Kidman as Gretchen Carlson, Margot Robbie as a fictionalized employee, if you will, of the channel, and John Lithgow as the infamous Roger Ailes. So now I want to really talk to you about someone who, full disclosure here, I know intimately and personally because she hired me at CNN when CNN was first launched back in we won't even say the year, however.
It was 80, and you haven't changed a bit.
I was 2 years old then. But Mary Alice Williams, who we affectionately call MA, is a television icon, first of all, a television executive and broadcast journalist, best known for building and operating CNN's New York bureau at the launch of the world's first global 24-hour, 7-day-a-week all news television network, while simultaneously anchoring the channel's prime time newscast. But in addition to that, she also co-anchored NBC's Weekend Today, and most recently, because I'm a person who lives right here in New Jersey, resident of New Jersey, anchored NJTV News on New Jersey's public television network. And I could not be prouder to be able to speak with you, to see you after so many years, and really to really give you some homage during this Women's History Month as we really talk about this. MA, good to see you. Good to see you.
Thank you for being part of our Cheryl.
Series. This is going to be great. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, we had a chance to see the movie. You and I saw it. We talked about it a little bit even before our official conversation today. And I guess what I should do is ask you right off the bat about its accuracy. Do you find it accurate for the most part?
It was accurate. I found it harrowing. I felt as though I had PTSD watching it. And it was the least of it. It was worse than that.
Wow.
So Cheryl, high heels and high hemlines always equal high ratings, right?
I mean, sex and sells. Clear anchor desks.
Clear anchor desks. Oh my goodness. Sex sells. It still, sadly, but Fox under Roger Ailes refined it to a kind of pornography, soft porn, that expanded to include selling a candidate, even selling the truth. And it took women's outrage to reach a critical mass to widely expose it for what it is.
I've got to tell you, and I don't know any of the women who took Ailes down. And I'm going to ask you also if you happen to know Gretchen Carlson. I don't know. Have you ever had any dealings with her at all?
I've met them all, of course, but don't know them personally.
Okay. But to talk about the courage and the bravery of all of these women, it just cannot be stated enough, because this is something you don't typically sue a network, but in this case, suing an individual worked.
Right. It shouldn't have been that difficult. This was a long time in coming. When something happens like Bombshell, like the critical mass it took for women to get together and bring this guy down, really actually happened over a very long slog of 40 some odd years. The sexual harassment was outlawed in 1964 under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, but it had to be refined and amended. And it really wasn't until 1986 that people were allowed to hold accountable the boss's supervisor. If a boss was harassing a woman, the supervisor could be sued. That was 86. This suit didn't happen until 2016. So that is a very long haul. It took a long time.
It sure did.
I think back on the bad old days where my friends were, I have to say quickly that it only happened to me twice, and not alone, in very public places. And it was it was printed in the newspapers. And so I was sort of left alone, thank heaven. But I had friends who were literally grabbed in the elevator and told that they had to put up with this because it was just you want to work with the
You want to
guys.
work.
This is what you have to do. Gloria Steinem called this kind of constant degrading, dehumanizing quips in the guise of compliments, right? She called it just life. You know, it was the price of holding a job. And there was no HR department back then, no laws that overtly made sexual harassment illegal.
And no Me Too movement.
And no Me Too movement. I mean, this event that you've just watched in Bombshell was what happened a year before the Me Too movement, a year before Harvey Weinstein. But it took a lot of women in newsrooms, a lot of women in the entertainment field to be able to say, hey, this is just wrong.
It's wrong.
Before then, it was, you know, we were new. There were very few of us women, Cheryl. You and I mean, I hired a lot of women.
You hired a lot of women.
Right. And so many that they called the New York Bureau of CNN Petticoat Junction after a 1960s sitcom about a town that was run by women. But it turns out that women do add to the bottom line in every industry. But it took a long time for us to figure that out, for the world to figure that out.
You're right. And I can remember going back to the Petticoat Junction moniker, if you will, when we were in the New York Bureau. And I think it was on a day when we finally were able to really see what are the manifestations of our work. And there were so many blonde women anchors. And I remember standing in the control room wondering, how representative is this? Because it didn't feel that way to me as a little Black girl who came from New Jersey.
It couldn't possibly have, Cheryl. And when you think about it, how crazy is this? When I was a child, I started when I was actually a teenager, I started doing this, but my first co-anchor job was with Chuck Scarborough. My dear friend Al Roker used to call us the whitest white couple in America. I mean, how did that represent New York? Think about it. And by the way, I just hasten to add, though it's no big deal either way, that both Chuck and I came this color.
But I remember you talking about this and you gave me this description about your eyes. And I remember as you discussed it with a former, your two blue eyes, with a former news director who actually gave you some heat about it. Tell us about that.
Well, he said that I didn't belong on. He was actually the station manager at WNBC. Said that I didn't belong on television because my eyes belonged in a horror film. I will say that they are odd, and my favorite students, I've been a college professor, my favorite students always say, oh, get the professor with the creepy eyes. So, you know, I get that.
Oh, my Lord.
It's okay.
It's okay now. All right, let's go back to the movie because there were some real tour de force performances. Let's face it. I mean, every single person who was on that screen really did
amazing.
Show absolute truth in honor in terms of what they did. Give me your thumbnail description, if you will, based on the characterization of all of them. The Megyn Kelly character, the Gretchen Carlson character. How would you encapsulate some of those takes on the women?
Well, I think it was really nuanced and sophisticated and compassionate toward the women, because at first you see their complicity, by their silence. They were complicit in allowing Roger Ailes and by extension, all the men of his ilk to continue doing that. I was told as a kid, as a teenager, when I started, and at the beginning of things, when these things would come up, you say a word and you will never work again.
Right. Even
my own agent said, don't say a word, you'll never work again. There was a time at WNBC which had started by the late 70s, hiring a substantial number of women reporters, and our executive producer was a woman, our director was a woman. It was pretty great. And at one point, the buzz went through the newsroom that there was a secret meeting in the ladies' room. And we all went in there, and every single person around the room said, it happened to me. This is what happened to me. And it was all casting
Oh my
couch stuff.
gosh.
It had not happened to me, but I was very young. And I was just talking to Pia Lindstrom. Do you remember
I
dear
remember
Pia?
Pia. Absolutely.
She was a great mentor of mine, and she said it did not happen to her. But remember that sexual harassment is about power. It's not about sex, kids. It's about power.
Mhm.
It is why
Exactly.
for centuries rape has been used as a weapon of war.
Mhm.
This is about power.
Yeah.
And Pia had power. I guess when I was at by the time I was an executive in news, I actually started as executive producer of news when I was 22 and 23
Wow.
here in New York. So that was really my history. So I always had enough power that wasn't that I didn't fall
Right.
prey to that as much.
Let me ask you a question. Take me back to 1980 when CNN was launched and you were hired by Ted Turner. What was that process like? What did the interview look like? How did he come upon you as the face of CNN in terms of the bureau chief, the person who makes the decisions, the person who hires, who determines what's going to go on the air? Take me back to that because I don't think I ever knew that story. And I think that would be fascinating for our audience to know.
Well, it wasn't Ted Turner who hired me.
Oh,
It was Reese Schoenfeld, the original president of CNN.
gotcha.
And he hired me because he knew that I could multitask, that I could build the bureau, literally wire Tower 1 of the World Trade Center with 8281 Belden cable while I was writing copy and putting it on the air and running the newsroom. But but then ultimately I had to meet Ted Turner, so we flew to Atlanta. I did not know that Reese had said to Ted that he was going to meet his new New York bureau chief. So I got there, the door to his office opened. He stood up and threw something and said, a woman, you didn't tell me it was a woman. He started marching around his desk, ranting and raving. I never got past the door jamb.
Oh my gosh.
And when he was done, I said, here's the deal. You don't write me. You don't call me. You don't visit the New York bureau without express written permission. Are we straight? And he said, yes, ma'am. And he treated me like he couldn't have been better for all those years. He was a wonderful boss to me, respectful and kind, asked my advice, it treated me as an equal.
Never knew that story.
I hadn't
Never
thought
knew.
of it in years.
I remember actually you probably sent me to cover as an entertainment reporter. I used to cover a lot of those celebrity interviews, of course. And every time Ted Turner came to New York, I was sent with the camera crew to cover whatever the philanthropic event might have been. And I recall at the time that he was dating Jane Fonda, having the guts to say to him, I wanted a raise on camera. And so he said, darling, talk to Jane. And he walked away from me.
Good for you, though.
Well,
Good for you,
I thought I would throw it out there.
But you bring up a good point, and women and girls should know this, that I was doing 2 or 3 jobs, as you've said. I was making a fraction of what the male anchors were making, or the male bureau chief. I was not paid equally, not ever. It was just before that time when legally they had to start taking a look at that. So pay was important then and still is. It's very important. I think Mika Brzezinski has a book or something called Know Your Worth. You got to know your worth. You got to ask for what
you do. You have to ask. You have to ask. Let me ask you this also. I mean, there's so much that I want to talk to you about because I've not seen you in such a long time. And there's this movie is just so chock full of great stuff. I don't think you have to be in the business to really appreciate it. But in terms of watching this film, you can take it in maybe 2 different perspectives in terms of looking at these women as either heroes or villains.
Well,
what would you say to that?
I think they're both. I mean, I think that women, we are not all just one thing, are we?
No.
And I wouldn't say it was villains. I have always, Cheryl, that I have always talked about journalism, and especially television journalism, as a team sport. Nobody does this alone. Well, it's also a blood sport, as you know,
Yeah.
that the rarefied air of anchordom is pretty, they're pretty few key jobs. And, once you have that job, I think a lot of people are inclined to hold on to it at all costs. And that's too bad. Because that's why it's so important to expand women and expand the reach. Now you watch television, it's almost all women, but that's another point. So in one case, I can understand and I sort of empathize with the fact that these women were not friends. They didn't really talk to each other. They didn't know each other. They were working at opposite ends of the day parts, we call them, one in the morning, one in the evening. So it was the Margot Robbie character, who is a composite. That's not an actual character, but that she became friends with Kate McKinnon. You see those kinds of newsroom friendships all the time. We certainly had them, didn't we?
Sure.
And they were absolutely critical to getting through a day, particularly when we were covering painful stories like September 11th or the Ukraine war, or all the other ghastly things you and I have had to cover back in the day. Drew, you were with me the day President Reagan got shot. Remember that?
Yes.
We needed each other then
Yeah.
because we had to carry on. When the Challenger exploded, boy, that was tough.
Yeah.
I think it's the only time that the camera caught me weeping. But
you weren't alone.
Right. But we needed each other. We needed to get through that.
Right.
So there's that. They were so on the one hand, they were not villainous. I think that's too strong a statement, but certainly complicit in the harassment by staying quiet. But once they talked, they were heroic.
They were heroic.
That was an amazing thing to do.
It was.
Gretchen Carlson is an amazing person for recording his conversations for a year.
How smart. I don't even know if I would have been that smart to think about it. Right. I don't think that would have been a consideration.
No.
And when you
look at you and I didn't have to.
We didn't think like that.
Right.
But, no. And when you think about it, Fox ended up paying, I think, something like $50 million to the victims of the sexual harassment. That is just unprecedented.
And remember, the tone is set from the top. People hire people like them. There are very few absolutes in this world, and that's one of them. People hire people like them. So it wasn't just Roger Ailes, but the guys he hired, Bill O'Reilly, behaving the same way.
Right.
So a lot of the settlements were as a consequence of Bill O'Reilly's behavior, not necessarily Roger Ailes.
And I was thinking just recently, in my brain, I'm thinking, who else was part of that kind of sexual harassment situation? And we're talking now, Chris Cuomo, and Charlie Rose, I remember, Bill O'Reilly, you certainly mentioned him, Matt Lauer. These were situations that we never, back in our time when we were doing television news, we didn't think in terms of.
I couldn't have imagined it.
None of that.
No, but I think maybe some of it was happening and it wasn't happening around us, Cheryl. I know that, we talked about it among ourselves in private. And what I want very much for people to understand from this conversation is that it's been a long slog to get to where we are now because of laws like the Civil Rights Act and its amendments, because of people like Gretchen Carlson and Megyn Kelly, and because of everything that followed. But it can be taken away in about a heartbeat. You can't legislate attitudes. You can write all the laws in the world, but you can't legislate attitudes, and it takes time for attitudes to change. And it's nice to see that it's starting to change now, that women are held in equal respect with men.
I was going to ask you if you think it's getting better. I mean, this is our Women's History Month, and we really do salute. And I said to you earlier, to pay homage to so many women like yourself, this is the time that we really want to take a step, not back, but actually a step forward to see what else can happen. Do you see our industry and this television industry getting better? Forget about what we noticed in Bombshell, because we don't want to base our noble profession on what we saw. But do you
Right.
see things getting better? I see a lot of women who are now taking over, even just as you did back in 1980. That was unprecedented, MA, that you would be the bureau chief of a major news organization.
And
Today
vice
things are
president,
totally.
the
Today
only
are
vice president, right?
yes, yes. But today things are a lot different. So do you
Yeah.
see things getting better
Well,
as
they
we
are getting
evolve?
better, not just in our business, but in all businesses,
Right.
because as women enter the executive suites and sit on corporate boards, corporations are finding that they're making more money. Their profit lines are going way
Mhm.
up. We are more collegial. We set a tone and a culture in our shops that is a consensus.
Mhm.
We are consensus builders. We reach consensus with people. We are less hierarchical
Mhm.
than men, and that's good for business. It's good for television.
Mhm.
And you ask where we are. When I was a kid, the great um, the great reporters were in Vietnam. They were all men,
Mhm.
and they were breaking stories. Look at the Ukraine.
Yeah.
We have the most extraordinary female reporters
Yeah.
out there on the front lines.
Front
They
line.
are mothers, for the
Yes.
record. They have
Yes.
children, and they're out there on the front lines working with these people. And I find their coverage compelling, incredibly compelling, because they're not only brave, but they're compassionate.
And it's nice to be able to see that side also, because there was always that point of view. When I remember when I was in journalism school, where you talk just objectivity. And I
Right.
remember covering 9/11, saying, how can I be objective about this? Our country has been terrorized. There's no way that I'm going to not shed a tear. There's no way that I'm not going to tell my point of view. There's no way that I'm going to just let this happen as I do my interviews.
Well, are you talking about the Ukraine coverage?
Well, that was then, but this is now, and so that's why I really admire, just as you said, the same women who are these war correspondents, and you and I go back to seeing Christiane Amanpour on CNN,
Right.
who was one of our own.
Yeah.
But we see these women who are really taking such, and you mentioned, an empathy too in terms of their reportage, and I like seeing that as well, because we
Right.
weren't able to do that back in the times when we were covering these stories.
Right.
Wasn't really permitted.
Well, when I started, women were not allowed to be war correspondents,
Right.
although it's a little known fact, Cheryl, that Elsa Clench, the iconic fashion reporter, the style reporter for CNN,
Mhm.
actually started her career as a Vietnam War correspondent for a television network in Australia.
Mhm.
So she was allowed to, but for the
Right.
most part, women were not allowed. And I think part of it was that all the bosses were men. So um, and I don't mean to male bash here, because I love men. I love my husband, my
Right.
brothers. There are a lot of great guys, really.
Right. Right.
But let me talk for a minute about the male gaze, which infused everything. It had certainly ruled casting and culture forever. Think about it this way. Remember when you and I started, the bosses believed that women wanted to watch attractive men at breakfast time. So on the morning shows, there was
Yeah.
always an avuncular, attractive male anchor and a cute,
Yeah.
increasingly younger females
A trophy type.
to
Mhm.
decorate the set,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Right. Exactly.
Well, the predators, once they were fired, lo and behold, the women anchors proved they could build ratings and revenues without the guys, and that's what
Exactly.
they're doing.
Not really needed, truth be told. I
Right.
was going to tell you one other thing about Roger Ailes, is since we're talking about this movie Bombshell. I had one sighting and one personal exchange with him, if you will. It was very brief, and I was at CBS at the time, and I was called in for an interview with Roger Ailes. And to tell you how this man was, which was not very pleasant, his first words upon seeing me as I entered his office were, "Oh, aren't we in luck today? I have to hire a minority." That's my
Well,
Roger Ailes story.
now I knew Roger for a long time. And he would take me out to lunch repeatedly and ask me if I thought that there needed to be a conservative, ideologically conservative voice in television news.
Mhm.
And I always said no. And I think that I was thinking about speaking to you about the subject and thinking, wow, I always said no. I was always going to be a journalist and give just the facts, ma'am, without any, partisan bias. And that was the prerequisite. Yes, these women were pretty and slim and twirled for him. Oh, yuck. But
Turned my stomach.
but they had agreed to have a partisan bias in the way they reported things.
Hmm. Smart women, though, at least. I mean, I've got to say that.
Very.
I mean, despite or in spite of or in tandem with the beauty, at least we saw the brains. I mean, you
Right.
can't take that away from any of them
That's
because
right.
they were super smart
And worked
super
very
talented,
hard.
and worked seriously hard.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Was there anything about the film in particular that enraged you?
Oh my goodness sakes, all of it. I was just so appalled at the I thought just from a director's point of view,
Mhm.
the horrible scene with Margot Robbie when she's hiking her
The
skirt
skirt.
and the white flag of surrender.
Mhm,
Um, that was her panties.
mhm,
I thought that was a genius
mhm,
moment, but made me cry.
mhm.
You know, made her cry. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it was just ghastly, and I'm sorry that anyone had to put up with that. But I know it's true.
Yeah.
That is not that stuff's not made up, and in fact, it was a lot worse. It was a lot worse than what you just saw in the movie.
I recognize that. And I'll say this also. In my own personal situation, I didn't experience the sexual harassment as much as I experienced the racism.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're both part and parcel to the situation ultimately, but neither was pleasant at all. And I think that these women were super brave for what
Yeah,
they
they
did, and
were.
we offer them, the courage that they had and the encouragement and the support because without them, there wouldn't be some of the women that we see on the air today or behind the scenes as far as that goes.
That's right. I hope that you and I, as part of this army of really smart, hardworking women, have expanded the ranks of our people so that we all can represent each other. If Black Lives Matter taught us nothing else, it's
Right.
that I can't know what it is
Right.
to be a Black woman.
Yeah.
I can empathize,
Right.
but I can't really know, can I?
Right.
And that helped me understand that.
So glad to hear you say that. I appreciate that too, coming from you. I really do. Thank you for that remark. And
Okay,
I'm going to say thank.
but we did
But
expand.
we did. Absolutely, we did. We did it. Mary Alice Williams, I'm so glad that you were able to join us today with the Ridgefield Playhouse Diversity Film Series. This was such a great experience for me to be able to how can I put it? To revisit after so many years and to thank you personally for hiring me and for giving me an opportunity to be able to first be behind the scenes as a producer and then eventually catapult to going on camera. I don't know if I would have had that opportunity had it not been for you. So I want to publicly thank you for that opportunity. Thank you so much.
You earned
You
it.
helped
You
shape
were
my life.
great.
Career-wise, you helped shape my life. Thank you.
Well, it was worth every minute. I
You're a
love seeing
doll.
you again, Cheryl.
Same here. We want to thank Mary Alice Williams for being with us today and talking about Bombshell. And I hope that you enjoyed our discussion. This bonus content was actually sponsored by People's United Bank. And we want to also thank the Aquarian Water Company for sponsoring the Ridgefield Playhouse Diversity Film Series. Once again, I'm Cheryl Washington, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. And thank you, MA, for being with us today. Take good care.
Thank you.